Former President Trump's eldest daughter, Ivanka Trump, testifying in her family's $250 million civil fraud trial. She is the fourth and final member of the Trump family to give testimony on the witness stand, following her brother and her father and both of her brothers, Donald Trump Jr. and Eric Trump.
Something has gone very wrong inside Trump's world tonight. Reports of a federal raid tied to a Trump-branded tower have sent shockwaves through Washington, just as investigators reportedly begin digging into what insiders describe as a quiet deal connected to Ivanka Trump. Behind closed doors, panic is said to be spreading because when federal agents start following financial records, private messages, and hidden negotiations, stories can unravel very quickly. In my 40 years studying political scandals, families don't panic over headlines. They panic when investigators begin connecting documents, money, and witnesses. Don't miss the truth today.
President Trump's daughter Ivanka is back on the stand after a short break in court. She's been calm and soft-spoken during her testimony today as the state's final witness in the civil fraud trial against her father, two brothers, and the family company. President Trump, Donald Trump Jr., and Eric Trump all took the stand already, trying to distance themselves from the company's finances.
Specific details going that far back, even when shown some emails, she said, I don't remember this email other than you showing it to me now, but personal financial statements, but those were not something that I was privy to, and it was not something that I was involved in. So very clear from Ivanka on the stand just a few moments ago.
Let me tell you why people close to Donald Trump are reportedly far more nervous tonight than they are willing to admit publicly. Because whatever this investigation ultimately becomes, the tone changed the moment federal agents reportedly entered a Trump-branded property tied to Russian business interests and shell company transactions. Now, slow down for a second because details matter. According to reports surrounding the investigation, federal authorities allegedly executed a search connected to a luxury Trump-branded tower in South Florida, a place built for wealth, privacy, and international money. The property itself may look like just another glittering piece of oceanfront real estate. Marble floors, glass balconies, foreign investors coming and going without much attention. But investigators are not interested in architecture. They are reportedly interested in records, financial records, ownership structures, private communications, hidden negotiations that may have stayed invisible for years. And this is where the story begins to feel much bigger than one building. Because almost immediately after reports of the search surfaced, attention turned back toward Ivanka Trump and a series of international business relationships that never fully disappeared from investigators' radar. Quietly, behind the political noise, questions appear to be resurfacing about overseas Trump-linked ventures and whether any undisclosed arrangements may have existed beneath the polished public image. Now, I want to be very careful here. No public criminal accusation has been proven against Ivanka Trump. No court has established wrongdoing, but investigators do not revisit old files without a reason. And people familiar with high-level federal investigations know something important. When agents start looking backward, it usually means they believe something new may connect to something old. That is the part reportedly making Trump allies uneasy tonight. Because once investigators begin comparing documents, financial transfers, property agreements, emails, text messages, the timeline starts building itself. And timelines have a nasty habit of exposing contradictions. What worries insiders most, according to reports, is not necessarily what investigators already know. It is what they may still discover. Who signed what? Who knew what? And perhaps most importantly, who talked. I've watched federal investigations for 4 decades, and the dangerous phase is never the headline-making raid itself. The dangerous phase comes afterward, when prosecutors quietly compare financial records with witness testimony. That's when stories either collapse or become criminal exposure. And today, inside Trump's political orbit, there are growing signs that people are beginning to understand the difference. Now, this is where the story becomes significantly more complicated and politically far more dangerous. Because according to reports familiar with the investigation, the real anxiety inside Trump's orbit may not be centered on the tower itself. It may be centered on Ivanka Trump. And if you've followed the Trump family business for years, you already understand why that matters. Ivanka was never just another executive inside the Trump organization. She became something far more valuable, the polished face of the family brand. While Donald Trump projected aggression and political warfare, Ivanka projected sophistication, stability, and credibility. She traveled internationally. She promoted luxury developments. She attended openings. She stood beside foreign investors and helped present Trump-branded ventures as premium global business opportunities. That image matters now, because investigators are reportedly revisiting questions tied to overseas projects where Ivanka played a visible role, particularly deals involving foreign financing, politically sensitive partnerships, and ownership structures that critics argued deserved far greater scrutiny. And once again, let me be precise, this does not mean wrongdoing has been established, but investigators reportedly examining an alleged undisclosed agreement tied to Ivanka changes the stakes dramatically. Why? Because federal investigations tend to move in layers. First comes the money, then the communications, then the relationships. And eventually, investigators begin asking whether anyone inside the organization knew more than they publicly admitted. That is the moment powerful circles begin to panic. Imagine for a second what investigators may reportedly be doing right now: matching property records, cross-checking shell companies, reviewing encrypted communications, comparing private negotiations with public statements. And if prosecutors believe someone misrepresented a business arrangement, concealed a financial relationship, or failed to disclose relevant information, the legal exposure expands very quickly. What makes this especially sensitive is timing. Donald Trump is not a private businessman sitting quietly outside politics anymore. He remains one of the most polarizing and influential political figures in America, which means any investigation touching his inner family circle instantly becomes both legal and political dynamite. Supporters are already framing this as another politically motivated attack. Critics believe investigators may finally be uncovering something deeper. But privately, behind closed doors, insiders reportedly fear something else entirely: documents, witnesses, and contradictions. Because scandals in Washington rarely explode from one dramatic moment. They grow quietly: one subpoena, one message, one witness, one forgotten financial trail at a time. In major financial investigations, prosecutors are rarely hunting for one smoking gun. They build pressure through patterns, repeated contacts, repeated transactions, repeated inconsistencies, and once enough pieces begin aligning, even very disciplined political operations can suddenly become unstable. Which brings us to the question Trump allies reportedly fear most tonight: what happens if investigators already know more than they are saying publicly? Here is the uncomfortable reality no one inside Trump's political orbit can fully control today. Federal investigations have momentum, and momentum, once it starts, becomes extremely difficult to stop. Because contrary to what people imagine from television dramas, investigations like this rarely explode all at once. They move quietly, methodically, sometimes frustratingly slowly. Prosecutors collect documents before they ask questions. They review communications before witnesses ever realize they are under scrutiny. And often, by the time the public hears about a major development, investigators are already months, sometimes years ahead. That is why reports of a federal search connected to a Trump-branded property are creating so much anxiety. Not because one raid automatically means guilt, but because raids usually signal investigators believe they are close to something concrete. Think about the mechanics for a moment. If authorities are reportedly examining financial records, shell companies, and private communications linked to overseas dealings, they are not simply looking for embarrassing headlines. They are reportedly trying to understand patterns. Who moved money? Who authorized agreements? Who communicated privately while publicly saying something different? And here is where things become especially sensitive for Trump allies. Because once an investigation touches family members, legal strategy becomes infinitely more difficult. Political attacks can be dismissed, media criticism can be ignored, but documents, witness testimony, private messages, those things are harder to explain away. Imagine the pressure reportedly building behind closed doors tonight. lawyers reviewing timelines, advisors preparing damage control, political strategists trying to contain panic before media attention spirals even further, because the fear inside any political operation is never simply the first revelation, it is the second, then the third. Then the moment separate stories suddenly begin connecting. A business agreement here, a financial transfer there, an old overseas project suddenly re-examined through a completely different lens. And once those pieces start forming a pattern, Washington changes very quickly. People stop protecting themselves as a team. They begin protecting themselves individually. That shift matters, because history teaches us something uncomfortable about political scandals. The greatest danger rarely comes from enemies. It comes from insiders deciding silence no longer protects them. A former advisor, a financial associate, someone with access to records, someone who suddenly believes cooperation is safer than loyalty. That possibility alone is reportedly enough to unsettle even the most disciplined political circle. In 40 years studying presidential scandals, I've noticed one consistent truth: institutions rarely collapse because of one explosive event. They weaken when pressure accumulates quietly, when witnesses begin cooperating, and when internal trust starts breaking down. That is the phase powerful people fear most. Explains the growing nervousness reportedly spreading around Trump's inner orbit tonight. Because while supporters continue calling this another political attack, people closer to the investigation reportedly understand something deeper. This may no longer be about one building, or one alleged agreement, or even one member of the Trump family. The bigger question now is whether investigators believe they are looking at isolated controversies or the visible edge of something much larger that has remained hidden for years. And if that answer begins emerging publicly, the political shockwaves could move far beyond Trump Tower. So today, we are left with a question that Washington cannot ignore. Was this simply another isolated investigation tied to questionable business relationships, or are federal authorities quietly uncovering something much larger beneath the surface of Trump's business empire? Right now, nobody outside those investigative rooms knows for certain. But one thing is clear: when federal agents reportedly begin connecting money, messages, overseas deals, and family relationships, political panic tends to follow. Tell me honestly, do you think this investigation fades away, or is this the beginning of a much bigger Trump family scandal? Stay with me for the truth.